I'm Alex Burton, and this is the Business File. Managing business organizations. You know, the very word organization implies some kind of organizing force, doesn't it? In business, that organizing force is people. A group of people who are such a basic and integral part of any business enterprise that we've got a special name for them, managers. If you stop to consider it, it's quite an elusive title as well. A company president is certainly a manager. So are any number of other employees, many of them far down in a company's organization. We have sales managers, office managers, managers of small assembly lines. So what do these people have in common that they carry the same title, whether it's into the boardroom or a company warehouse? What exactly is a manager? Are there similarities between the jobs they do? What do managers do? Why are some managers more successful than others? What is management? To get some answers, we'll be visiting with three managers whose work is very different. A professor from Boston University, a president and chairman of the board of an important fast-growing electronics company, and a manager of a different sort. Tony La Russa, the manager of the Chicago White Sox. What does a baseball manager have in common with a manager in a business organization? As the headlines in the sport pages tell you, the success of a major league team rests on the shoulders of its manager. He takes the credit when the team is winning, and the heat when it's not. A manager in a business shares those same joys and frustrations because the manager is responsible for the success of an organization, whether it's a company spread around the world or 2 or 3 people in a single office. The purpose of our program today is to understand the role of management and what it means to manage business organizations. Now we're going to Boston and the office of a man who has made a career of understanding what it means to manage business organizations, Professor George Leibovitz. George Leibovitz is a professor of organizational behavior and management at Boston University. Professor Leibovitz, it's a real pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'll open with a rather simple, direct question. What is management and why is it important?
I really enjoy telling undergraduate students when they come to Boston University, where I teach, and they come to the School of Management, the first thing I tell them is, welcome to the world's oldest profession. And I know what they're thinking, but management is the world's oldest profession. Jacob Bronowski, in his series on the ascent of man 10 years ago, traced the history of civilization, and he said that you can't have civilization without management. It's one of the oldest forms of human activity. You can't hunt, you can't kill, you can't pillage, you can't build until one human being tells another human being what to do. And this is an old business. So management is kind of fundamental to civilization. It's essentially the process of getting things done through and with people. Now, anything I tell you today will be biased by the fact that I'm a psychologist by trade. I view most of management as dealing with people. People are the valuable resource in management. We talk about land, labor, capital, but it's labor, it's people who get things done. Managers control that process.
All right, so now we know what management is. Tell us, how does management really work? Give us an example.
In the context of management being a very old business, you may remember the movie The 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston and Edward G. Robinson. What I argue is that managers today use exactly the same principles and end up with the same titles that Vincent Price used in that movie. Vincent Price was head of the pyramid building shop. And you may remember that they focused in on Vincent in his tent, while out in the back 30,000 slaves are building pyramids. And they're being whipped. And there are 200 slaves on a rope, and they're lugging huge blocks of granite. And every once in a while, one of the slaves falls under one of the blocks and gets squished. That scene brings tears to the eyes of any classical chief executive who sees it. It's beautiful. There's good productivity. There's no union. There's no turnover. There's little attrition. When they come into Vincent Price's tent, the boss, the chief executive officer, what he's doing is what every chief executive officer does today. He's got a problem. His problem is, how can he get 30,000 slaves to build a pyramid? And the way he does it is he establishes a table of organization with levels of management at every level. He, of course, is the top. But the first thing he's going to say to himself is, where am I going to get 30,000 slaves? I need a director of slaves, an expert in slave management. because he's just a pyramid builder. So if you visualize the table of organization, the first block is the boss, but then the boss has got problems, he's got things he's got to do. He needs to find experts to run each of the segments. He gets a director of slaves, but now he's got to get the slaves. And he's got to find a general who knows how to burn and loot and pillage to go to Mesopotamia and bring the slaves back. That's another block. And then, do you know how many rocks there are in a pyramid? Now that's materials management. Now you need logistics. He needs another expert for that. And soon he's filled 4 slots on a table of organization. Each level is responsible for major functional parts of the organization. The purpose of the table of organization is to continue to break tasks up into pieces. The pieces have to get more and more and more simple, because the whole object of the table of organization is to simplify tasks until you get down to where the slaves have to build the pyramid. And classically, historically, management has viewed its role as being responsible for the big picture, smaller levels, smaller and more micro levels to reach the first line supervisor.
In your story, you mentioned chief executive officer, director of slaves, and first line supervisor. Explain something to me. I have friends who are managers, and they all seem to have different titles for their jobs. First vice president, district manager, shop foreman. What's the significance of all these titles?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because titles are important to people. People have to know what they're responsible for, what their role is, what the authority relationships are. Hence, you normally see president, vice president, division head, supervisor, and so on. But they can be very misleading. A first-line supervisor in one organization may very well be a PhD physicist managing a bunch of other PhD physicists, versus a first-line supervisor in another with the same title who may be managing a group of commissary workers. And so, within an organization, titles are specific to it, and outside of the organization, you better watch out.
Okay, we see the titles are specific only within an organization, but they may not mean the same thing in other companies. But tell me now, what are managers really paid to do?
The 5 functions of management come out of some work that Henri Fayol did in the 20s. Fayol was a businessman, an executive, who was one of the first people to really look at what managers do. Because he noted that there are people in organizations who add numbers, who are physicists, who are engineers, but there are lots of other people who don't seem to be doing that. They're doing something else.
So the 5 functions of management are?
Planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling, resources. So regardless of where you go, regardless of what country, regardless of what business you're in, you can identify people in the organization who are managers simply by kind of looking in and peeking in and seeing those functions being performed. Those tend to be the responsibilities of management.
Do all managers perform the same functions? Is it universal or does it vary?
Actually, it's everywhere. It's pernicious. You can't get away from it. And it doesn't really matter if you're the chief executive of a first-line supervisor. The titles, responsibilities, and scope of what you do is certainly going to vary. But essentially, most managers, if you pull apart what they do, are still planning, organizing, directing, staffing, and controlling. And the points of emphasis may change. There may be a lot more planning, for example, at senior management levels, and there may be a longer perspective to planning at senior management than at the first-line supervisor level, who's trying to work out a budget for next week or a production problem by next week. But it's still planning and organizing and so on.
Then if all managers perform the same functions, why is it that some managers are more successful than others?
Let's contrast functions of management. I plan, I organize, I staff, and so on, with the broader issue of roles of management. There's something more to it than just functions. You might argue that anybody can do the functions. But organizations are not run by faceless bureaucrats poring over management information system data. The real organizations, the ones that perform, are ones that are run by real flesh and blood folks who perform many roles. Henry Mintzberg is a professor up in Canada, did an interesting study a few years ago, and then later wrote a book on the nature of managerial work. He followed chief executive officers around. 2 weeks at a pop, I think he followed 6 of them. And he recorded everything that they did, and he tried at first to squeeze what they did into planning, organizing, staffing, and so on. And he found that he had a tough time because he saw that. But he saw a lot of other things going on as well. That these people were performing a different kind of function, especially as a chief executive officer. And among the functions he saw them performing obviously decision-making functions. But he saw them as a liaison. He saw them as a figurehead. I see that in my own company here. that as the president of the company, I think I plan and organize and control, but I also spend a lot of time caring about whether or not somebody's sick, or helping somebody if they've got a personal problem, or serving as a representative of my company to the outside world. So every chief executive officer has many roles to fill, and what you find is, so does every other level of management. Mintzberg only talked about chief executives, but if you look at middle managers and first-line supervisors, in a very real sense, they too are performing a lot of those liaison decision-making, figurehead kind of roles every day at work while they plan, organize, and staff.
Talking about the major roles of management, that seems like the perfect place for me to ask our second guest to join us. But Professor Leibovitz, I don't want you to go away because I'd like you to be involved in our discussion with Don Lawhorn, who's joining us from his offices in Dallas. Don Lawhorn is Chief Executive Officer of Captronics, a young, fast-growing company in a very competitive segment of the electronics industry. Don, thanks for inviting us in today. How are you?
Doing fine, Alex. Thank you very much, and glad to be a part of the program.
We've just been talking with Professor George Leibovitz from Boston University, and he's given us an academic view of the various roles that a manager is expected to fill. What are some of the major roles you really do play in your business?
Well, I think the primary role that I see for me here is leadership, establishing a climate that's conducive to productivity and personal growth, one where the individuals can excel to achieve. So leadership is a significant role. I find that at my level, I do spend a great deal of time negotiating with suppliers, with customers, contracts. Obviously, resource allocation comes in whenever we're budgeting and doing our annual plans. And monitoring is very important. Just recently, sat down with a couple of our key people and reviewed monthly objectives. That is, our people, all of them, have their management by objectives that are done monthly. And so we had an informal review. So monitoring is another big one. And I think entrepreneur, where I'm required to innovate and create and in fact wheel and deal to make things happen. So those are probably 4 or 5 of the more dominant roles for me.
Well, let me ask you, Professor Leibovitz, if a manager has these important roles to play, what skills does he need to bring them off?
Essentially, we're talking about conceptual skills and technical skills, but very much so people or human skills. You know, I often draw the following kind of diagram. When you start at the bottom of an organization, you're hired right out of undergraduate school. Graduates of undergraduate school will be hired because they majored in accounting or engineering or whatever school they went to. They're hired for a technical skill. And they'll be hired at the bottom for that. And a lot of their time will be spent performing that technical skill. If they get very good at it, they may even get a master's degree in this technical skill. And pretty soon they're the best technical person in the whole company. In the old days, engineers would be the best slide rule pushers in the whole company. If you're the best slide rule pusher, now calculator or computer operator in the whole company, what do they do to you?
I don't know, give you a raise, promote you?
They promote you. And what's the first thing they do to you when they promote you? They take away your slide rule. They put you right about here, give you 2 pens, a carpet, and a small office, and say, go forth now and manage those engineers or accountants or financial analysts or whatever. Now you've got a whole problem. Now you've got problems you've never dreamed of before because you're right here. Now, part of your job is certainly technical. You still have to be a financial expert, an accounting expert, engineering expert. But now you got all this other stuff called management. You have problems you never dreamed of. You have people who tell you to go to hell. The slide rule never told you to go to hell. You have people who don't show up to tell you to go to hell. If you're reasonably good at that act of first-line supervision, which is really the toughest job in most companies, right down here where you're supposed to be an expert in both. Someday the president will come down and put his arm around you and say, Martha, or Bill, your vacation schedules were the only ones I could read. I am making you VP of engineering or accounting. Now, you're a senior executive. Now you're performing the executive functions. You're up here. Now you're worried about long-range planning and staffing and budget. You're a long way from the bench. You're a long way from this month's journal and this month's new technique. This is the way it ought to be. See, you're guaranteeing, by the way, that you will become the least competent accountant. engineer, physicist in the whole place. But what we try to convince people in schools of management is that this management, planning, organizing, staffing, coordinating, controlling, is as technical as engineering is, or any other technical field.
Don Lawhorn, let's get back to you. These three skills that Professor Leibovitz has identified, I believe he called them conceptual, technical, and human skills. How do you use them in your job as a manager?
I'd be glad to start with the technical aspect. I have seen myself professionally almost to the degree that the textbooks suggest. That is, the lower level supervision uses more technical skills. The closer you are to the direct output, you use more technical skills, and then as you move through the organization, you're using more conceptual skills at the higher that you go. And of course, the linking pin in there is the human skills. So for me today, the technical skills probably when I'm working with a sales professional who has a problem in an application, a technical application. In our case, it would be an electronic application. I have the stronger electronic background, not the stronger sales background, but the stronger electronic background. So I might intercede for a technical application where I could answer some questions on electronics. But I do use that aspect of technical areas less today than I did in the past. The human element every day. The human skills are probably the most demanding, and it ties in with, as we saw earlier, negotiating, whether we're dealing with customers or the people within the organization, suppliers. It's something that's there every moment of the day. So I apply that across the board. The conceptual skills are keeping your eye on the big picture. We set out with a formal plan, and we attempt to address that plan on a daily basis, and seeing all the parts fit together. That's where the conceptual skills come in, and I tend to do that on a regular basis too.
So those skills really are a part of a manager's daily life. One last point I'd like to cover, and I'll address this first to Professor Leibovitz, is decision-making. Tell us, how important is decision-making in a manager's job?
It's what managers do. Decision-making is fundamental to the name of the game. When somebody puts bars on your shoulder and calls you a manager, or stripes on your arm and calls you a supervisor, what they're paying you to do is to make decisions. That any fool can yell, "Take that hill." You don't need undergraduate training in management to say that. It's getting the hills taken where managers earn their money, having the decisions made, making those decisions properly. It's the application of both good common sense and some fairly sophisticated problem-solving and decision-making tools that make a manager's job viable.
Don, do you agree with that? Is decision-making where you sink or swim as a manager?
Well, Alex, as you know, that is a significant dimension to the manager's job. I think the research that I've seen and read in my studies suggests that managers make anywhere from 10 decisions to several hundred decisions in a given day, and it's hard for us to manage that. That is to look at that and see that that's what's happening, but in reality that does happen. I think,
excuse me, Don. It's obvious that decision-making is a big part of your job, but as you see it, what are the keys to that good decision-making?
A couple ingredients have to come into play on decision-making. Number one, it's having the courage to make the decisions, the hard ones and the easy ones. I think that there's two dimensions to decision-making that I always look at, and that's the quality of a decision. That may be economic impact, that may be support of your business plan, and then the acceptance. Will the people involved go along with it? That's something that happens that's very important. So I think being aware of the intricacies of the decision-making process is critical. And again, I think the key part of it is the courage to do it. As one writer said, it's not just doing things right, it's doing the right things.
A good note to close on. I want to thank you, Professor George Leibovitz, and you, Mr. Don Lawhorn, for this very enlightening look at managing business organizations. Now, as I promised you at the opening of the show, we are going to go out to the ballpark, and we're going to visit a manager of a different sort. But is he so different? The manager I'm talking about is Tony La Russa of the Chicago White Sox. Earlier, We went to the ballpark to take pictures of Mr. LaRussa at work. And Tony, we're really happy to be with you. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Okay, Alex, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to open with a general question. As manager of the White Sox, do you think the functions you perform are anything like a business manager?
Well, I think there is a real correlation between business and baseball. In fact, I had an undergraduate degree in industrial management, and some of the principles I learned there are what I go by here, in the sense that I think you have a planning function. I think it's very important that you have an idea of what you want to do, whether it's you're talking about the game that evening or whether you're talking about spring training, another important planning time. You have a certain delegation of responsibilities that's very important. I think when I first came up into baseball, I played for managers that tried to do everything. But when you have qualified coaches, you're spread kind of thin. And if you can use the coaches, you can delegate the responsibility and the authority, you get a lot going. But then you have to have the feedback coming back. So I think those are a couple of the areas. People, it's a word that you hear a lot, communication, and it can be abused and everything, but communication is very important. I think whenever you're dealing with people, and players are people basically, and what you're trying to do is identify a goal, and that's winning games. And at the end, you want to win enough games to where you win your division and go from there. So you identify goals and you try to structure the program, whatever it is, have a certain amount of coordination. There are a lot of things that I think that people in business are doing that basically, it's the focus that you use in baseball.
So to manage effectively, what are some of the roles you have to play?
You have a role as a preparer of your ball club. That starts with your pitcher, for example. You want your pitcher and your catcher to have an idea about the other team and how we're going to best get them out. You do that before the game. Now you have to watch the game to see if how you prepared needs an adjustment. If everything's not going right or is going right, you want to be able to cope with that. You want to prepare your hitters for the pitcher that's trying to get you out. But once the game starts, that to me is the biggest fun of all, because now you're talking about your role as a competitor. You have the authority. That's the one thing in baseball today that has not changed. Players have more pluses as far as more money they're making and things, but when the game goes, the manager's still the guy that says who pitches and who plays. So I think you have a role as a decision maker, especially during the game. You get a chance to decide when you want to change your lineup, when you want to change a pitcher, when you don't want to do anything. So the decision-making responsibility, very important. Before the game, you have a role as a representative of the organization to the media. In other words, I was always taught by Bill Veeck, for example, that one of your responsibilities is alerting your fans that are caring about your ball club as to what's going on. That's why you can't be tight-lipped. You can't say, oh, I have no comment today about this or that. Because the fans, they're interested in your team and they want to know. Why is this guy struggling? Why is that guy not in the lineup? Why are you doing this with your pitching? If you think that's a very private matter, you don't belong managing a ball club, because you're responsible to your fans. So you have a PR function to explain what's going on with your club. Then during the winter, you also have a public relations function where you have to go out and promote your club to people all over baseball or all over the public, in general. I would say the most important, though, is your role as a authority figure with your ball players, your role as a buffer for problems between ownership, between umpires. It's a role as a problem solver for them. In other words, you have to assist them through some of their slumps. You've got coaches that can help you. And if you just concentrate on running a game intelligently, well, then you're going to miss a chance to get your club to play according to their abilities. And that's why I think my most important role, if I had no idea whatsoever when to change a pitcher or when to bunt, it's getting my players mentally to the top of their game so that they're enthusiastic. They have an idea that what we care about is a team winning, not the individual doing well. That is the toughest part of a manager's job. That's the most important. If your club tries hard, then I think a manager is doing his most important job.
Tony, we've already learned in this program that a business manager needs 3 basic skills: technical, human or interpersonal, and conceptual. How do you apply those 3 skills?
I would start with technical, because I think you have to have a basis of respect from your players before you can go beyond that. And I think one way that you can establish that respect is to have them believe that you know enough about your craft or your industry or the game of baseball so that they feel like you're a contributor and that you don't stand in the way of them. In other words, you have no idea about how the game's supposed to be played. then where is that respect going to come? Just because you're a nice guy? So I think you have to start from the basis that they really believe that you're on top of the game and you understand what gives a club the best chance to win. So technically, I think you have to know the area you're dealing with. I think it's very important. The next one is interpersonal. Basically, as a manager, you are dependent on people performing for you. If you think you manage well, but the players or the workers don't do well, you're going to end up having a negative operation. So you're really you're dependent on getting whatever it's the technical information, the psych, whatever it is, across to your players, to your people. So I think the relationship that you built up based on respect, based on fairness and honesty, I think those are all the good virtues that you should stress. For example, if you try to pull the wool over a player's eyes, you might get by with it in the short run. Sooner or later, they're going to catch on to you. You're going to lose a lot of credibility. So like I say, in my case, I really try to be myself. I don't try to be somebody else. I try to be honest. And I try to keep challenging them to accept the fact that it's we and how the team does. That's the most important stat that we go into. Finally, conceptually, you're trying to figure out what's the White Sox way to play ball. How are we going to handle our pitching? Are we going to take care of our pitchers? Are we going to push them? What should our hitters do, So there's a lot that you do as a manager trying to coordinate what your big league club does with what the rest of the organization does. You certainly don't want to have a case where your minor leaguers are learning to play one situation this way and you get to the major league and your manager plays it a different way. That's very disruptive.
Tony, I have to stop here. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Thanks for the insight, and good luck to you and the White Sox.
Well, I appreciate that, Alex, and the opportunity to present my side. Thank you.
We began this program with some questions on what it means to manage a business organization. It seems to me that we're departing with some clear answers. There are different levels of management, and they all perform the 5 basic functions: planning, organizing, staffing, directing, controlling. To do their job successfully, managers need 3 skills: technical skills, human skills, and conceptual skills. And they have to be able to perform different roles. On top of it all, managers are decision makers, and the decisions they make guide the direction of the organizations for which they are responsible. And we've seen that management is the force that pulls the organization together, guides its journey through the world. I'm Alex Burton, and this has been The Business File.
The preceding program is part of a college credit course.